welcome. Welcome to this CNBC Africa special. We are coming to you today from the Johannesburg Central Business District here in South Africa. My name is Fifi Peters. We are here, of course, for the launch of the CFO Roundtable. It is a public and a private sector initiative that aims to unlock significant investments in the economy of Gauteng, which is the economic hub of South Africa, as well as the seventh largest economy in Africa. Over the next hour or so, you'll be hearing from key stakeholders across government as well as the corporate sector who will outline the strategy and the plan to grow the Gauteng economy and to help realize some targets for it to contribute, or its targets to increase to a 2 trillion rand economy in the medium term. We do hope that you'll join the conversation with us. We hope that we'll cross paths with you on X. You can tweet us at CNBC Africa and reach out to me at Fifi Peters. With that said, I would like to welcome the first speaker for today, who will set the tone for the session as well as introduce other welcome remarks. So that is Zaid Moola. He's the head of corporate and investment banking over at the Standard Bank Group. To the audience who is here, I would ask that you kindly help me welcome Zaid on stage with a warm applause.
Thank you, Fifi. Mr. Jacob Mamabolo, Gauteng MEC of Finance. Ms. Tasni Mutara, Gauteng MEC of Economic Development. All our mayors, MMCs, HODs, of course our distinguished clients and guests, all protocols observed. Good morning, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this launch of the Gauteng Provincial Government's Roundtable Partnership with our private sector chief financial officers. At Standard Bank, we have for many years been serving our clients and the economic development across the African continent. When we say Africa is our home, we drive her growth, we mean it. And today is a sign of our commitment to the economic growth of South Africa, as well as a particular focus on the Gauteng province. We have partners on deals where the private and public sector have come together to solve problems and witnessed firsthand through collaboration how we create a country that we all want to live and prosper in. Worth mentioning are the Bakwena N4 Platinum Highway and our involvement in the energy transition through renewable and decentralized energy transactions, as well as sustainable financing transactions. Further to this, we have supported a lot of SMMEs as well as affordable housing projects, not just in Gauteng, but across South Africa. These projects have an impact on growing our economy, improving the infrastructure, as well as the overall quality of all South Africans, and truly demonstrates our willingness and appetite to partner with the public sector. The Gauteng province boasts the 7th largest economy in Africa, is the 26th largest urban region in the world, and is the 6th largest urban agglomeration on the continent. It is the financial, technological, and industrial hub of Africa. Contributing 35% to GDP, the province is strategically positioned to lead growth conversation as the economic hub of South Africa. Gauteng is also the headquarter to many major South African corporates, and so it's really great to see so many of our corporate CFOs in the room today. You each play a significant role as your decisions directly affect the growth and development of this province and South Africa. Growth and infrastructure development and investment will no doubt serve as a catalyst for job creation and enhance the overall quality of lives of all South Africans. But to do this, we need strong public and private sector institutions who engage, collaborate, and commit. Growing Gauteng together is crucial and critical for the progression of South Africa. As part of our strategic partnership with the Gauteng Provincial Government, Standard Bank have committed to focus on 5 key areas to collaborate. These include, but are not limited to, enterprise development, supplier development, corporate social investment with a specific focus on healthcare and education, youth skills and development programs, as well as consumer education and employee value banking. Today's roundtable launch is instrumental to the role of government as an enabler for economic development. I encourage each of us to leverage this platform today through constructive dialogue and sharing of innovative ideas, which could both drive Gauteng as well as South Africa's growth. A personal thank you to the Gauteng Provincial Government for choosing Standard Bank as your strategic partner for partnering growth in South Africa and this region. We look forward to a long and prosperous relationship with you, as well as the many other key stakeholders who have joined us today. Thank you.
And thanks to you, Zaid. So this is arguably one of the first times in a very long time in South Africa's democratic present where we have seen the will to collaborate between the public and the private sector as strong as it is, and to the scale in which it is currently being demonstrated. And so we now hear from the public sector. We'll start hearing from a few key stakeholders from the public sector who will share their views on the initiative that is being launched today, beginning with the remarks from Councillor Dada Morero. He is the City of Johannesburg's member of the Mayoral Committee for Finance. Councillor.
I'm nervous. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Acknowledge the presence of the MEC Mama Bolo. As they say in some quarters, Ngwana wa Dikulube. Greetings to MEC Tasneem Mutara. Greetings to Zaid Muller. And of course, acknowledging all mayors and CFOs who are here today. And acknowledge, of course, the program director, Fifi. My task is an easier one. It's a task to really welcome you to the city of Johannesburg, where Standard Bank is located, where the provincial government is located, where captains of industry and business are located. We are a city of 6.5 million citizens, a city that is growing on every day, receiving at least 18,000 people every month coming into our city with an intention to find greener pastures and opportunities. And of the 18,000 people that we receive every month, at least 15,000 of those come from provinces in South Africa, and 3,000 of those come from all over the African continent and elsewhere. And that 3,000, bulk of it is constituted by those that are undocumented and enter the country illegally. Johannesburg in recent months or weeks has experienced a number of challenges, and I think all of you are aware. We have had an explosion. There's been buildings that are in fire, and more buildings are going to catch fire, unless Johannesburg as the city does something immediately. And we have therefore taken a decision as the city of Johannesburg to confront this matter with the agency that it deserves, to ensure that we can intervene and turn around the situation in the inner city. Of course, we will be approaching the private sector, because we would need them to invest in helping us to correct what has happened over the times in the inner city. This will also lead to us rethinking the future of the inner city, and all inner cities in the world are beginning to rethink and reposition themselves. So we'll have to do the same in rethinking the inner city of Johannesburg and where we want to take the inner city to. And we'll then continue to appeal to the private sector not to leave the CBD and remain in the CBD. And thus we are also calling on the provincial government to also remain in the CBD and all other businesses so that we can grow the inner city of Johannesburg. Perhaps let me take you also back to the statements that were uttered by the President of the Republic of South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa, when he spoke about the importance of BRICS in South Africa. And he said the following before the summit could be hosted. He said, I quote, "The BRICS relationship extends beyond governments of the member countries. Bodies like BRICS Business Council, BRICS Women's Business Alliance, BRICS Think Tanks Council, the BRICS Civil Forum will ensure that the opportunities of this association are explored across society. The relationship seeks to promote people-to-people contact, including among youth formations. Among other things, the person-to-person contact enhances travel and tourism between BRICS countries," close quote. I deliberately chose to go back to the BRICS precisely because we are all about collaboration, and today it's a collaboration between the private sector and the public sector with an intention to find solutions. Firstly, one, to be able to look at finances affecting municipalities in particular, and you'd know that municipalities in Gauteng have serious challenges financially, including the city of Johannesburg itself, which is trying to get itself out of financial challenges that it finds itself in. And this is a result of the economy that is not responding to provision of jobs, and thus residents can no longer afford to pay for services and rates in their respective municipalities. And as a result of that, the revenue that municipalities should be generating is now under serious threat. And as a result of that, we think this collaboration will begin to help us to find solutions. Now, we also hope that this dialogue will not only be a talk show, but this will result into real action, because we believe that things that happen in Johannesburg translate into action. And therefore, we will find solution and ensure all our municipalities will look into the following issues. Pool funding for municipalities as one of the key elements that can help, especially smaller municipalities within Gauteng. We have to look into matters around how do we ensure that we prepare our financial statements and everything, and ensure that our auditing and the reports of the Auditor General helps us to prepare ourselves better for rating agencies, so that our municipalities could get at least a positive rating, and as a result of that, we'll be able to borrow and borrow at a cheaper rate. We also have to look at how do we find cheap money and alternative money in the financial markets to help us to support municipalities. Let me close by saying to Ms. Lamini, who's the organizer, that this is a great idea, an important idea that will help us to propel Gauteng to become once more the great province that all of us would always wish to see Gauteng as the greatest province ever in South Africa and in the continent. Let us also be aware of the matters around climate change, and that will require the private sector to also play a pivotal role in the climate change as we try and attempt to respond through the C40 and the Paris Agreement to find better solutions towards climate change. You'll realize when you left home today, it was very, very hot this morning, which suggests, therefore, that we have to respond to climate change issues, otherwise we are in trouble as the world. So with that being said, I welcome you to this great city called Johannesburg. Thank you very much.
We thank you, Councillor, for that very warm welcome. So while the province of Gauteng may be the smallest province in South Africa, it certainly punches above its weight in terms of economic contribution, contributing over a third, or just over a third, to GDP. But we are here, and we have been listening so far to messages that have been saying that Gauteng wants to do more. And to describe what such an initiative could mean for its ability to do more in terms of its contribution, I would like us to please welcome the Honourable Tasneem Mutara. She's the MSc of Economic Development in Gauteng.
MEC Mama Bolo is wishing me good luck, but I'm not nervous, so I'm fine. Thanks so much, and good morning, MEC, good morning, Mayor, Mayors, MMC of our host municipality, the representatives of all the organizations gathered here, in particular our host, Standard Bank, thank you so much. To our panelists who we're looking forward to listening to and sharing ideas with. To the leaders of all the business organizations, in particular the CEOs, thank you very much for entering into this partnership with us. Of course, it's not the first of its kind, but definitely under different circumstances. Of course, to the government officials, the HOD of the Department of Treasury, leading her team, thank you so much, as well as the managers from different companies. It's an honor for me to stand here before all of you today, more importantly considering the events of the past couple of weeks. We as a province are fresh from hosting the 15th edition of the BRIC Summit, which became a historic one due to the number of countries on the African continent that descended onto our shores. It was also the summit where another significant milestone was witnessed. We welcomed new members to the bloc of countries whom I believe are excited as we are to start working together to benefit our nations as well as our economies. To the Program Director, many things are known about Gauteng, but do indulge me as I remind you of some of these facts. As Gauteng residents, we only account for just on 18,000 square kilometers of land, and that accounts for only 1.5% of the total land size of South Africa. Yet, ladies and gentlemen, we account for 16.1 million people, and it continues to grow. Because as we are gathered here, more people are arriving in the cities and townships with the hope of making a better life for themselves as well as their families. I could go on and on about the facts and figures, but I would be preaching to the choir. The economy is a numbers game, and any self-respecting economist understands why Gauteng holds such a potential for better prospects regarding any sector if we all work together collaboratively. Just this past month, Premier the Honourable Panyaza Lesufi hosted the Gauteng Clean Audit Awards. This event was hosted in recognition of the Gauteng Provincial Government's performance in the 2022-2023 audit outcomes. He even reiterated that, and let me quote him, "A clean, transparent and service-oriented administration is an apex priority for our Gauteng Provincial Government." Close quote. This program director is testament of how seriously we see the roles of CEOs as well as CFOs in delivering on the promises of clean governance. This launch could not have come at a better time. We must strike while the iron is hot. The eyes of the world are firmly on us as a province, and the work that will come out of collaborations such as this one will certainly place Gauteng head and shoulders above the rest of the country and continent. It's time for CFOs to be seen as more than protectors of the purse, but also as strategic stakeholders working together with CEOs both in government and the private sector to push for 40% share of the GDP and even more. The unrelenting attacks on the global economy are teaching us that even amid a crisis, we should identify opportunities to allow us to enable growth. I also stand here before you having engaged in a couple of important trips this year, Portugal in March and the USA 2 weeks ago. The trip to Portugal was immediately followed by meetings between me and the ambassador, along with our teams. Coming out of that meeting, we then hosted the Portuguese Chamber of Business and its members in Sandton. The objective of this event was to present to our counterparts in Portugal how far we as Gauteng Province with our intergovernmental stakeholders have gone in resolving issues of concern for both businesses and investors from Portugal, and there are quite a few. The workshop was critical in that it brought under one roof us and the Department of Home Affairs, for example, to talk about issues relating to visas. In addition, we had robust discussions on the BBBE and how that piece of legislation continues to evolve to assist both investors, but importantly safeguard the economic interests of the country. The title of the workshop was The Ease of Doing Business in Gauteng, and following the formal program, we hosted a business-to-business session between South African and Portuguese companies and investors. The team as we speak is busy with more similar events with the aim of creating meaningful dialogue that goes beyond media headlines. Honourable guests, we need to have an honest, robust and urgent conversation about the role of legislation. Having worked in the Department of Infrastructure previously, I've witnessed how, instead of creating an enabling environment, the law can also stifle progress. It's my considered view that even though we all fully appreciate the importance of the PFMA, we must not sit on our laurels. Economic growth can only come about because of an agile and evolving environment. Provincially, you have the PFMA, while in municipalities, you have the MFMA. We are a long way from 1999 and 2003, when these pieces of legislation were enacted respectively. The question is whether they have evolved enough to fully align, or we are still moving along according to the status quo. This, of course, is a full debate for another day. A couple of exciting things from our side. We're seeing progress in the implementation of Phase 2 at the Tshwane Automotive Special Economic Zone. The team and I continue to work tirelessly to ensure that the 1% that companies such as Ford Motor Company contributes to the total GDP of the country not only gets retained, but that that investment grows to 2% in the next 5 years. Not only that, the incubation programs also that are on the go at the Tshwane Special Economic Zone and the OR Tambo SEZ continue to benefit local businesses to a point where significant progress is made and the economy starts to benefit in real numbers. And today we're also joined by the CEO of the IDZ as well as the Group CEO of GGDA. So for those who want to just get more information and interact with them, please do. It's clear just from the profiles of the people gathered here that Gauteng is more serious than ever about doing things innovatively to ensure that our common goals for economic growth are realized starting now. Consider this, ladies and gentlemen. A bamboo tree takes about 3 years in the ground before the mother plants take off and start producing multiple shoots, providing a bamboo grove appearance. Before you physically see it, a lot of toiling and nurturing will need to happen. The same goes for our economy. It will take a lot of effort, many hours of hard work and collaboration before we see real results. After all, wise men and women are those who plant trees whose shade and fruit they will never get to enjoy. I wish you well as you deliberate throughout the day, responding to some critical questions and coming up with tangible solutions that will take our economy further to the next frontier. Thank you so much.
MEC Mamabola, so I just wanted to say it would have been very difficult for MEC Mutara to be nervous. I mean, she has been at a podium. She has been speaking at a podium every other day, particularly in the last month or so during BRICS. So this is now become her friend. But to the point that she was making about economics or the economy being a numbers game, many of you in this room will be aware that we recently got relatively goodish numbers for South Africa's economy. Goodish in the sense that it wasn't as bad as was expected. In fact, it was even better. Not so goodish, perhaps, in the sense that it is an economy or rate of growth that continues to underperform, and it's certainly not an economy that is expanding and growing to the scale that is needed to create the much-needed jobs that people need. So, to give us a little bit more of the numbers, and tell us what the numbers of the Gauteng economy are looking like, the South African economy actually are looking like, and more broadly what they could look like, perhaps with initiatives in which the private and the public sector collaborate a lot more. I would like to welcome a gentleman who needs no introduction within this particular auditorium, as he is the chief economist of the Standard Bank Group. His name is Mr. Gulimbalim.
So I'm quite nervous. unlike Tasneem. Welcome to MECs Mamabolo, Ms. Mutara, Councillor Selo. It's really great to be able to address this audience. The speakers before me peppered the conversation with a variety of themes that I think are incredibly pertinent if this blend, this melding between the public sector and the private sector were to show traction. Economists perhaps will think of it as public goods melding with private goods, and the distinction between the two becoming a little bit more blurred, which is not an untoward or an unhealthy dynamic. Now, I've come with a little bit of theatre, so I have a little bit of presentation. I'm also really grateful to Fifi for telling you all to have a television posture. Ordinarily, when an economist takes to the podium, people fall asleep. I think it would be very embarrassing if your family saw you asleep. So Fifi has effectively put a little bit of electricity under you, and therefore you have to look discernibly interested in what I have to say. So you will pretend that you're interested, and I will pretend that what I have to say is interesting. And maybe somewhere in that is a healthy relationship. Now, I've packaged my remarks into 3 parts. The first part is a little bit academic, but I hope you'll indulge me in being able to embrace the thoughts and the themes that I'm going to speak about in this seemingly academic segment. The second segment will be to take that little bit of economic literature and to test it in terms of the international realm and what it suggests for growth. And the third section would be speaking to the Gauteng economy and its fundamental construct, as well as perhaps comparing it to 1 or 2 other provinces, just for relative perspective. Now, the first exhibit, aside from this gorgeous person, is to perhaps judge what drives economic growth. Historical economic literature will tell us that when you add physical capital, human capital, and innovation, you get growth. Physical capital is perhaps both the function of financial capital and physical capital as we would imagine it. Roads, bridges, telecommunications, networks, and even natural vista like Table Mountain, to the extent that it has powerful monetization capability. So physical capital is well understood. Human capital as we too would understand it quite basically. Economists really to inflate our roles and perhaps to get paid a little more, which doesn't really work very often. We call innovation total factor productivity. Again, just a fancy word for innovation. And innovation is a critical ingredient in driving economic growth. But more recent literature has not cast doubt on those elements and those ingredients in growth. In fact, the bulk of those ingredients, physical capital or its formation, human capital development, and innovation tends to be a private sector phenomenon. And so certainly it's not to be dismissed. But in my title here, I'm already alluding to the notion that growth is undergirded. It's scaffolded by strong public institutions. And it's a busy chart, and you needn't place too much emphasis on the 100 or so countries that I've listed there. But there's a few critical takeaways that you can glean in a few seconds. If we look at countries that are rich and countries that are poor, it's astonishing when you have a country like Switzerland, for example, that has per capita income in excess of $40,000. Contrasted at the other spectrum with Ethiopia, where per capita income is about $100. But aside from this breadth of divergence, what this particular exhibit should also signal to you is the huge concentration of countries within the low per capita income segment. So those countries framed by the red border just give you the sense of roughly 80 nations at least, and this certainly isn't the entire universe, that are concentrated in what we could call low income. Then there is that segment just right of the red encircled area, which we would judge as intermediate income between $6,000 and $16,000. And you will notice that it's in fact quite sparse. There's only a few countries. And then if we look at the high income countries, high per capita income countries, it's close to 20. But again, combined, less than 30 countries occupy the intermediate and high income per capita zone. But there is a density of countries that are low income. And so we test whether it is simply a case of those capital instruments and a lack of innovation, perhaps. And in fact, the results foment slightly more differently and quite brutally. So this exhibit simply gives you a correlation between governance, aggregate governance, and per capita income. The blue speckles are advanced economies, and it basically suggests that advanced economies with high levels of aggregate governance tend to have high income, high per capita income. And the red speckles, countries that we find consistently have low levels of aggregate governance, also tend to have low economic outcomes, low per capita income. Now this distribution is overwhelming and unassailable. But if we break down this idea of aggregate governance slightly further, and we look at a variety of other institutional factors, the results are consistent. In other words, whether it's voice and accountability, the regulatory burden, the rule of law, relative levels of graft, the constraint on executive powers, and property rights, the signal is consistent. Higher levels of, I'm going to assemble it under the banner of overall aggregate governance or institutional robustness. The more institutional robust a nation is, the more likely, if not certain, it will have a higher level of income, a higher level of per capita income. But what does this higher levels of institutional soundness, robustness actually deliver? Again, this is a little bit of a busy exhibit, a busy slide, but quite simple in its statements. If we look at the extreme left exhibit, what does it say? The red dots simply measure governance, and the blue bars relate to each particular region's income per capita on the extreme left exhibit. And again, the suggestion is consistent. As you show improvement in public institutions, you show gains in per capita income. The middle exhibit talks to economic growth. Stronger public institutions deliver stronger economic growth. And the third exhibit on the extreme right, your right, of course, says you will have lower growth volatility. So the summary, if I were to end my narrative here, is to say to you, robust public institutions deliver higher economic growth, higher per capita incomes, and lower growth volatility. You must be wondering, what do we mean by strong public institutions? Public institutions, in a more general sweeping suggestion, refers to the rule of law. And the rule of law would broadly refer to perhaps those formal and informal constraints on economic life, social life, and political life. Constraints that reduce uncertainty and increase confidence, that then facilitates physical and human capital formation, investment in innovation. If we were slightly more specific, rather than just simply suggesting that strong public institutions means the rule of law, if we're slightly more specific, we would talk about organizational capacity. We would talk about the regulatory framework, and broadly speaking, the general legal environment as it relates, for example, to property rights. Those form the basis, broad basis, of an institutional fabric. And as I'm suggesting in this exhibit, this is the outcome that you would deliver on the foundation stones of strong institutions. But we also found that strong institutions then tend to encourage strong public policy choices. Those nations that have got robust institutions tend to be more open to international trade, and international trade being a significant lever for economic growth. So this exhibit again just reinforces the point that countries with stronger levels of overall governance tend to be more open, tend to have a higher level of exports and imports as an overall share of trade. And I would argue, as a landlocked province, this is kernel to Gauteng. MEC Mutara spoke about Ford, and Ford has got a very significant export dimension, as well as being a local supplier as well, as do the wider automotive industry. But it's enough for me to stand here and talk to you about better governance delivering better growth. If we actually test the experiment and try to derive some level of numeracy, and here I'm just using, for example, various regions to establish the point. So you've got 4 regions there, and the zero line would be a representation of the aggregate level of governance. If sub-Saharan Africa as a collective were to move to the next stage of improved governance, and the governance average level that we would glean would be for the Middle East and Turkey, it basically suggests that sub-Saharan African growth would improve by slightly less than 1% from its current trend level. If sub-Saharan Africa shifted instead to developing Asia, it would be slightly more than 1%. But if we were able to garner the levels of aggregate governance prevalent in the best of the advanced economies, it would boost GDP potential by an additional 5 percentage points. That's an astonishing level of promise. Of course, things like this do not happen overnight. They're not quick, they're not easy. They happen over time. But directionally, the investment in robust institutions quite simply surpasses investment in any other infrastructure. I would punctuate it by being quite bold and saying robust institutions contribute 3/4 to an economy's growth potential, superseding the long-term benefits of the private sector's investment in capital formation, whatever kind. Now, many of you may have been thinking, but I've been talking so lyrical about the levels of governance standards in the advanced economies. And in fact, some would point out that maybe there is a crisis of democracy, or more specifically, a crisis of the rule of law in some advanced economies. Last night we celebrated rugby in France, but the other days France would seem to be in flames. And as an advanced economy in Western Europe, it also then begins to challenge these notions of aggregate governance. I'm not suggesting that there is levels of governance that don't have blemish in the advanced economies, but at least when measured on fairly robust scientific criteria. If you look at this particular exhibit, it suggests to you that at least in the early 90s, there was general improvement in governance levels in most regions. And in fact, more recently, there's been average governance slippage in most regions as well. But it is the aggregate levels of the rule of law that hold, the aggregate levels of the property rights that hold course, levels of graft, and so forth, that are immeasurable and that are discernibly different in some regions. Maybe some would take contest with this particular exhibit. It shows the rule of law in South Africa over the last decade. And by a variety of surveys of institutions who do this kind of work, it's consistent. Maybe the degrees of plunge would matter or would reveal differently, but the rule of law seemingly within South Africa over the last 10 years has drifted lower. And we look at the various areas in terms of overall governance that have been pinch points. It's indicated on this particular exhibit. The economy in terms of the economic capacity to do business, security apparatus, state legitimacy, and public service delivery. Some of it may even be around, as has already been indicated, funding challenges. Now to the third section, so that I also don't overstay my welcome. If we look at Gauteng's economy in terms of GDP, The numbers are a little stale than some of the numbers that were mentioned here, so I'm just using the official data as last audited by Stats SA. When it jumps out at you, Fifi has highlighted it, Tasneem, the MEC Mutara has highlighted it, Gauteng is hefty, a historical legacy of our mining era. Gauteng is bigger than KwaZulu-Natal and the Western Cape combined. However, at least in the period that I've presented here, roughly 2 decades, there's not much in terms of growth difference. Gauteng has grown more or less as quick as the Western Cape. KwaZulu-Natal has been the slowest amongst the three. But there's really not much difference in terms of the growth rate. Perhaps Gauteng just looks amplified in this particular exhibit because it's starting from a higher base. So the nominal amounts will look more or less more elevated. But in terms of growth rate over 2 decades, these three relatively large provinces have had more or less similar growth rates over this period. Just to put it slightly different, that for some of you that may be interested in a little bit more of imaginative descriptive, saying the same thing differently. KwaZulu-Natal is roughly 45-46% the size of the Gauteng economy. And the Western Cape is about 40% the size of Gauteng. So Gauteng certainly carries a higher level of swagger, a greater degree of weight. But Gauteng has also been seemingly a greater magnet for drawing in migrants into its population. And of course, it has its higher levels of population related to a birth rate, so the number of people born in Gauteng also is nominally larger than in the other provinces. Would you believe 20 years ago, KwaZulu-Natal had more people, a greater level of population than Gauteng? I'm not suggesting anything sinister, but I do note at round about the time of the Polokwane conference, Gauteng overtook KwaZulu-Natal in terms of populace, or should I say KwaZulu-Natal fell behind Gauteng in terms of overall populace numbers. So as you can see in this particular exhibit, Gauteng also houses just about twice as many as citizens in the Western Cape. So the responsibility in terms of per capita service delivery for this population, for this province, has grown fairly significantly. Here I've attempted to articulate the sectoral dimensions of the Gauteng province. And in a moment I'm going to juxtapose it against the Western Cape. If you look at the grey segments, it's startling, and this is universal for South Africa. We have deindustrialized. So again, the ambition for Ford to go from 1% to 2% of the region's GDP speaks to this deindustrialization trend that has plagued us heavily. In 1995, we look at the grey segment, it asserts that our manufacturing sector accounted for about 24% of provincial GDP, having slipped to 14% of GDP. This is to be lamented. It's lamentable because the jobs multiplier in industry, the value creation in industrial sectors, offers far more potential for workers than the services industry. The services industry, which in fact, if you look at the trade, catering, and accommodation segment, has more or less remained stagnant over this period. And if you look at the finance, real estate, and business services sector, this has swelled, perhaps taking some of the share from the industrial base. But the swell in the financial services industry is, in fact, universal across the country. So it's mimicked in the Western Cape region as well. General government occupies almost 20% of the Gauteng economy. So there's a little bit of weight, there's a little bit of swagger in what they do. When I show you the Western Cape, you may think I'm subtly suggesting that the Western Cape has got smaller government. But just bear in mind the more hefty population share in Gauteng, and hence the weight on government to be able to deliver services and economic opportunity. And so here's the Western Cape, just by way of juxtaposition. And you can see the industrialization sector, or at least the deindustrialization of the economy over the last 3 decades as well. A consistent theme. It's a national phenomenon. The agricultural sector is more hefty in the Western Cape than it is in our zone. And you may have noticed from the earlier exhibit that even mining has shrunk to being fractional in the Gauteng economy, even though it was the heartbeat of the mining sector, Gauteng being the heartbeat of the mining sector about 100 years ago, or slightly more than that. You can see how trade, catering, and accommodation has in fact grown in the Western Cape. Recall it was fairly static in its size for Gauteng. So tourism and the opportunities for tourism in the Western Cape seems to be adding a greater draw card, for example, to that province. And you can see how finance real estate has also increased in its relative share in that particular region. So to bring my remarks to a conclusion, just a few points that I would like to revisit. Historical literature reminds us that human and physical capital innovation is a heartbeat of economic growth, and the private sector plays an outsized role in this respect. However, that investment is ultimately undergirded by robust public institutions. And I hope the numerical evidence that I presented earlier would have been convincing in that respect. So the empirical evidence suggests robust institutions are the scaffolding upon which any long-term opportunity is founded upon. The benefits from that are higher economic growth, greater shares or levels of per capita income, reduced economic volatility. We also find that stronger public institutions serve as a magnet for investment. It enhances trade openness and also results in greater human capital formation. The Gauteng opportunity, to the extent that I showed you, if sub-Saharan Africa were to, over time, graduate to a higher level of governance, there could be 5 percentage points worth of additional economic growth per year. And Councillor Selo Moreira spoke about South Africa or Joburg, Gauteng having challenges. And to speak candidly, when during the BRICS summit, the President hosted an astonishing level of leadership in Stanton, it was starkly juxtaposed against a city where a main road had exploded and near 80 people had died. So juxtaposition is stark, but in that challenges is the depth of opportunity. To be able to lift the Gauteng province from all of these fissures and these impediments which have tempered economic performance, locking it at around 1%. Therein lies that opportunity. So quite simply, there is a symbiotic relationship between the public sector and the private sector. There is a need for reciprocity. Even before I use the word trust, I would use the word reciprocity. A need for the private sector to make certain commitments. And I would then suggest respectfully the need for the public sector to make certain commitments surrounding robust institutions in particular, to undergird that private sector capital, to make sure that it's tractable and enduring. Thank you for having me, ladies and gentlemen.
Gulam, I think that applause signified that you had actually not overstayed your welcome, but in fact that the audience would have liked you to stay on a little further, no? Fascinating insights on the South African economy, fascinating insights on Gauteng, and I think even more blown away by the emphasis on the strength of public institutions and good governance in being the springboard to the growth that we desire. Quite often there's quite a heavy emphasis placed on infrastructure, and I don't know about you, but I've never heard to the same degree the importance of governance and public institutions as having such a multiplier effect on growth. And so, I think it is quite opportune that we do have the next speaker coming, perhaps just to give his brief response to some of the economic insights that we have received, but more importantly, just to speak on the current initiative under launch, the CFO Roundtable, and what he thinks about it. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the Honourable MEC of Finance, MEC Jacob Mamabolo.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I must make a confession that is definitely not so easy today to stand before you, CFOs, people who hold money. But yeah, and on a more serious note, let me take this opportunity to extend my best regards and greetings to the political leadership that is here. MEC Mutara, the executive member, and of course, custodian of our economy in the province. I would like to sincerely appreciate your presence here. Let me also just indicate that we are very fortunate that we have been joined by executive mayors. I've thus far seen 2 executive mayors of the Rand West, and of course, the mayor of Lesedi. I hope I have not left out any executive mayors. But let me take this opportunity to thank the 2 mayors for joining us and to sincerely welcome them and appreciate their presence. We have with us MMCs of finance, but let me take the opportunity to acknowledge the hosting MMC of Finance, Councillor Dada Morero. Let me also just take the opportunity to inform you that it took us a very long time to prepare and organize this event. That's why it's a bit difficult for me to even believe that today we have gathered here. And just before I say a few words, let me thank sincerely the CEO of SIBA, Mr. Nicholas van Beek, who is the convener of our roundtable, and his team, and all the CFOs that are from SIBA. They've really done us very proud by putting this together, working with SIGFARO, led by its president who's here, and of course the CEO of SIGFARO, who have both helped us to put this together. I really like to thank them. And of course the team from Standard Bank. I know that I've seen that Mr. Zait has just left the room, but I want to thank the team from Standard Bank, our banker, for also hosting us, very good facility, but also for the work effort they've taken to put this together. I want to thank them. Let me also just thank the HOD and the team in the department. It has not been easy. This was as if we're organizing for the budget, chopping and changing all the time. But thanks to you, HOD, well done. I want to convey my sincere thanks to you and the entire team. We do have a very good panel that is still to come. They will be introduced, but I'd like to thank all the stakeholders and, of course, all the speakers before me for their very excellent inputs. I want to acknowledge that, and, of course, to Standard Bank economist, Mr. Gudam, Thank you very much. Thanks for a very good presentation, and you have made my job very easy as well. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I have prepared a presentation, but let me just say to you that today is a very special day to us in the Gauteng Provincial Government, in that we are launching our partnership between government and the private sector CFOs. And this partnership is, I must say, a very important initiative to us, which we believe is going to help us not only just grow the economy, but create jobs and improve the quality of life. Now, the very few points I'd like to make is just to share with you what are some of the reasons and, of course, the main purpose why we decided on creating the roundtable. And, of course, I've had extensive discussions with MEC Mutara on this so that we could work together as well to make sure that this partnership, as the MMC was saying, is not just a talk show, but deliver good results to us. Now, the very first thing I'd like to say is we hope that through this partnership, we will be able to harmonize public and private finances, bring together the private and the public pairs together. We want to ensure that this engagement creates a common platform for us on how to align our priorities, and it provides a meeting point for the two sides on how to coordinate investments to bring about sustainable development in our province. I must say this partnership is also a stakeholder engagement that will provide a voice to the private sector CFOs in the preparation of the provincial budget. Through this partnership, we are starting a conversation and dialogue on how to work together, and we are committing ourselves to making sure that we put one brick at a time to build a better Gauteng and to build our economy. That is, in a nutshell, why we thought it is very much important to partner with the private sector CFOs. We hold the budget of the province, they hold the resources and finances of the private sector, and we strongly believe that bringing this together, harmonizing this together, will be able to help us turn the corner on the difficulties faced by our economy. You may recall that I had the privilege in March this year to present the budget of the province, and we have put into the Gauteng economy 493 billion over the MTF period, over the next 3 years. And for us, this money that we're putting into the economy represent our contribution, represent the brick that we're putting together to build and to make sure that we can have a better economy in the province and, of course, build a better life for our people. Now, as the Gauteng Provincial Treasury, we are essentially the CFO of the provincial government, and that is why we thought it will be good to build a partnership with the CFOs in the private sector so that we can also hear the voice of the CFOs when we present our budgets. In November, we'll be tabling the medium-term budget policy statement. We want to make sure that the voice of the CFOs in the private sector and municipalities is heard. That's why we also have Sikfaro with us. So when we do the budget next year, which will be the last for this current term, we also want to make sure that we integrate and take into account a very important voice of the chief financial officers in the private sector. And that is why we are excited about this initiative, because it will enable us to work with our counterparts, the private sector CFOs, in what is really a pioneering effort to bridge the gap between government vision, where we want to go, and of course the corporate action by the private sector. The private sector is spending its money on priorities that are obviously important to them, but we also spend money on priorities that we believe are critical to the work that we do and, of course, to our mandate. But the reality of the matter, ladies and gentlemen, is that we're working not so much in a coordinated way. The private sector invests there, municipalities put their money there, and we also put our money somewhere. So that is why we believe that we need to work differently. We need to, turn around the corner and make sure that we don't continue to work in a manner that is uncoordinated. That's why we're talking about harmonizing the public purse and the private purse so that we can have an integration of our investments and be able to spend money in a manner that complements each other. As you would have seen from the economist Gulam, the economy is in a difficulty. You would have seen in the media that the fiscal environment is not good. It's highly challenged, and of course, when we go to the medium-term budget policy statement, I'm quite sure that the Minister of Finance will paint even a much more detailed picture about the complexities. So that is why the little that we have in government, the little that sits with the municipalities, the little that sits with the private sector, it's important that we bring that together so that we can optimize their impact and be able to get value for money. So that's why we believe that it's important to coordinate and complement our resources through investing in the same space to achieve a common goal, and that is building the economy of our province. Now, this roundtable needs to correct this issue of working past and parallel with the private sector and money going in different ways. We need to optimize the little resources, as I've already said, and of course, the public money should complement and support private sector investments. Now, let me also just take the opportunity to reflect a bit on the situation in municipalities. Just last week, we had the Intergovernmental Relations meeting with the MMCs of Finance, Team Finance Gauteng. And National Treasury team that was there made a presentation that, was very worrying about the patterns that we're seeing, particularly in the municipal space. And that is why through this roundtable, and of course you will hear SIGFARO when they do the presentation, we want to make sure that we address the bottlenecks that negatively hamstring or impact the investments in our municipalities. And of course, these bottlenecks range from red tape to availability of bulk services necessary for infrastructure development in some nodal areas requiring investments to ignite economic activities. We need to assist municipalities in the following way: incentivize them to cut red tape, build a sustainable revenue base to attract investments, spend money effectively and efficiently, build capacity to spend on infrastructure to attract investments, fix roads, electricity and water, encourage the leadership to ensure that budgets are spent on things that crowd investments. Let me emphasize this point that municipalities are not just areas for delivery of services. Municipalities are investment spaces. They are critical economic sites. Direct investments, whether local, foreign, goes into a municipal environment. So it is very much important that if we are to sustain our GDP contribution, that we look at the space in the municipalities and work with municipalities through SIGFARO, the CFOs of municipalities who are members of SIGFARO and SIGFARO itself, to then say, how can we create a sustainable long-term financial base for the municipalities so that they can be able to raise revenue? Because if we just say to municipalities, make sure that you deliver services, the often things that we say to municipalities, but we don't look at how to help them over time, create a base for revenue generation, sustainability, it's going to be difficult for them. But I must say, MMCs of finance that are here, that you'll recall that last week we said, and this was emphasized by the team from National Treasury, if we don't spend money budgeted for infrastructure, we should be aware that we are constraining the potential and capacity for investments into the economy in municipalities. Not spending the municipal infrastructure grants, retaining the money, not spending it the way it's supposed to be spent, itself is pulling the province down, because investors want good infrastructure for water, for electricity, and for many other critical things that are important for their investments. The number of days it takes to comply with municipal bylaws, the regulations for an investor is too long. The amount of compliance and red tape you have to go through, it's quite complex. So we need to make sure that we reduce red tape in municipalities. We need to make it easy for people to do business in our municipalities so that municipalities can realize very good investments, and that's critical for their long-term financial sustainability. So you will hear us moving forward that we will be looking at how as a province we can support municipalities to cut red tape, to make it easy for people to do business, to make sure that we enhance, enable, and incentivize our investors so that they can put foreign direct investments in our municipalities. So, ladies and gentlemen, the point we are trying to make today is we decided on a brick, not because I have also been, moving in the infrastructure space, in the construction space, as MEC Mutara also would have said, but I thought perhaps we should look at this idea of construction, of building, of putting a brick, one brick at a time to build. And each one of us can say, here's my brick, this is my contribution, this is what I can do. I've said to people that if Nelson Mandela could make a contribution just from prison, not only prison, but on Robben Island, come out and be a celebrated global icon, it is possible for every CFO in every space they have to make a contribution, to put a break. You can imagine if Mandela was a CFO in prison, or MEC of Finance, or MMC of Finance, or had access to the resources that we have, I can tell you would have made huge impact on our economic space. So each one of us sitting here, if you were to just take 2 steps and reflect a bit, and say, in the space that I have, in the space where I have, the little resources that I have, I can put a brick, one brick at a time to build, to make a contribution. So that is the issue that we're trying to say. If you just look at the quote by Nelson Mandela that we have chosen, I won't read the whole quote. I think I've been speaking for long now. The issue there is Nelson Mandela, and of course, Desmond Tutu, both leaders talked quite eloquently about the need to build a rainbow nation. If we don't put a brick to build, if we don't say, I'd like to play my part, I'd like to make my contribution, there's every chance that our economy, our country, our rainbow nation, our democracy could gradually degenerate into an alternative that none of us wish to see. An alternative of hatred, of despair, finger-pointing, of blaming, of doom and gloom, of just things looking bad. So we've got to be positive. We've got to say from today, I'm going to put my brick, just as our leaders did. Let me conclude by saying our Constitution says we are united in our diversity. We are strong in our diversity. Let us build on it. It is our shared and common destiny, and will be extremely weak the day we start to look at our diversity in a different way. So this is a platform to the CFOs. This is an opportunity for the CFOs, for each CFO to say, let me put a brick. And let me also say that, the brick as well, especially in Afrikaans, sometimes when they say mpestina, it could mean actually the money itself. But here we're talking about building. And I think the CFOs are in a good space to make sure that we build. So let us harvest the opportunities in our diversity. Let us make sure that we can put a brick. And of course, we do have difficulties. We do complain here and there. But we think that it is time to look forward and say, what can I do to build our province, to build our country? So our martyrs have been chosen by history to make a difference. I believe that we are also a chosen generation of CFOs, of leaders, of economists, of managers, of different capacities. We have an opportunity to say, let me make a contribution for future generations. For the young people, some of them, they look and say, how does my future look like? So we can work together and build our province, build South Africa, build the continent, and build the world. Thank you very much. Looking forward to working with you one brick at a time. Thank you very much.